Hello, Hornets fans, and welcome back to another Buzz Beat, a Charlotte Hornets podcast. This is Richie, and I'm joined with the full crew here with Lee, Brian, and Spencer. We are here live on audio with Twitter Spaces. We're got live video going on Twitch and in YouTube. If you guys would like to interact with us, whether that's through a Twitter Spaces request or through the comment section of YouTube, we can definitely display that on this episode. For this episode, we're going to be discussing the trade deadline as it is quickly approaching here, February 9th. We will talk about how the Hornets should and could approach this and maybe even come up with some fake trades as well. So, Spencer, I know this is kind of like one of your favorite parts of the year, I think, outside of the basketball court. For me, I like talking about free agency a little bit more, but you definitely live for this, Spencer.
Yeah. I live for having a 2.5-year-old is what I live for now. But yes, the trade deadline does excite me, um, especially this year because it's been hard to watch Hornets basketball. I'll be completely upfront. I've watched far less Hornets basketball this season than I've watched in a long time. Um, being a part of this very esteemed podcast, maybe I shouldn't admit that, but it's just the truth. So, and I think that I do think that the Hornets have some opportunity at this trade deadline. There's some complications. There's some things that definitely make trades more difficult, specifically the player that I dug in on, which we'll get to later. But hey, I'm excited. I really am, Richie. Like, I'm excited for February the 9th. It's the first thing I've been excited for all season for the Hornets. So, and also nervous, obviously.
Lee and Brian, how does this compare to draft chatter?
Not nearly as much fun, in my opinion. I don't know, with the draft, you're selling like hope and an opportunity, and I love the scouting process, and especially getting to be around a lot of these ACC guys. It's certainly fun when those names come up, especially. And for this, it's usually when you're thinking trade deadline, at least with the Hornets, it's just, in years past, it's like, are they going to sell? Are they going to, they're going to be buyers and ship off too much for some marginal piece? And now you get to be on the opposite side of that, which is like, well, they're definitely not going to be buyers, but are they going to be aggressive enough of sellers to move off of any of the things they have that could potentially work? And so, no, it's not. It's not like a particularly fun spot to be in. I much prefer the draft. But the trade deadline is sort of like, kind of one of the last before the lottery. Is sort of like one of the big kind of like milestones between now and in the middle of May. That's going to kind of shape the next couple of years for the Hornets. So this matters quite a bit.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add is that when we were talking pre-production, I believe is what they call it in the biz. I'm just going to speak into existence that Mitch is going to make a trade while we're recording, and we're just going to all lose our minds collectively with our audience. So here's to hoping.
Yeah. Mitch Kupchak has traded PJ Washington and the Denver first-round pick for Kyle Kuzma. So the Hornets are going to try to get to the play-in spot here. Going to make a final push here.
Chips all in. Push the chips
in. Again, I did say I was nervous as well. I'm excited. Nervous.
Well, it's funny. Spencer and I recorded a podcast, I don't know, a week and a half ago, where it said, "Will Mitch stay idle?" And I think that title was mostly as a joke or half joking. And as we get closer to this date of February 9th, it feels like it's more and more of a possibility that it could happen. And that to me would be a big mistake. And Brian was talking about in seasons past where the Hornets could be that 8th, 9th, 10th position where they might make a bigger move, quote unquote, to up their chances to make the playoffs. But in the situation that they are in now, sure, they can just ride out the season. And, they may not be in the bottom 3 right now. They're currently in the bottom 4 as San Antonio has dropped below them. But I do think with the way that this roster is constructed with a couple of expiring contracts, with some decisions to be made in the free agency, I do think it would be a big mistake for the Hornets to sit this one out. And even if it just means, I keep saying this, even if it just means something small, getting off of Mason Plumlee to get a second round pick or something of that nature, because I think when you come up on this offseason where you have decisions to be made with PJ Washington and Jalen McDaniels, I think both are going to be back. So maybe one of them could be out the door. So is there a sense, Lee, that Charlotte might not make a move before February 9th? And how disappointed would you be with that decision?
Yeah, I agree, Richie, in the sense that, like, I would say, like, maybe 5 to 10 days ago, I started to, like, get this feeling in my gut. I was like, wait, like, we're all far too convinced that they're going to do something. Like we are just all, like, us, Hornets Twitter, like NBA pontificators, everybody's just like, oh, like, of course they're going to move Oubre. Of course they're going to move Plumlee, and even some people, maybe rightfully believe that the right thing to do would be even move a bigger piece like a Rozier or a PJ. So I have started to get this creeping sensation that Mitch is going to sit on his hands. And I would say I would be, like, mildly disappointed. I mean, at the end of the day, I do think this team is mostly bad enough as constructed to stay in that, like, top 5 window.
Mhm.
I do have my concerns that a healthy LaMelo Ball will kind of accidentally drag this team to, like, 3 more wins than they need. But so I'll just recap it all by saying, yes, my antennas are absolutely up that Mitch is going to literally do nothing. Number 2, I would be, like, mildly to moderately disappointed, but at the end of the day, like, we're getting off the Plumlee and Oubre money either way. If we don't get, like, a fringe G League young prospect and a protected second round pick for them, like, is it really a massive deal? I would say no. I mean, you think back to what they did last year. They acquired Harrell for a similar package. I think the season before, I think they got Wanamaker at the deadline. I believe that was 2 seasons ago. So
The barrel
Mitch has done little things here and there. Yeah. Yeah. And, well, that was when, like, every single one of our backup guards was hurt and they literally needed, like, a warm body.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are my thoughts, boys.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be similar. I mirror a lot of Lee's thoughts. I would be moderately disappointed. I think there's some low hanging fruit for them to add a future piece, whether it be a young player or a young prospect, a second draft prospect, future second round picks. I don't think they have any surefire, like, awesome pieces to trade, but there's a couple solid veterans that are having big years. I mean, Plumlee's having probably the best season of his career, and perhaps Oubre was as well. But I know his injury maybe complicates his trade value or trade availability some. I do think, Lee, you were sort of talking about this, like, it just sort of got into the NBA, like, online ether that, like, the Hornets were going to make a move. And I get that, because people covering the league, people that follow the league can see that the team is bad, that they're backsliding, that they need to obviously, like, lean into the tank and the rebuild. And, well, if that's the case, then other things you can do kind of more along the margins before the draft, before the lottery, that type of stuff is, what do you have to move off of to try to get some stuff in return, and also maybe in the short term, make the roster not quite as competitive, and perhaps clear the deck a little bit for some younger development pieces to get playing time, which is why it really does just seem so obvious that they should try to move Plumlee. Like, it's an expiring contract. You sell high on him, and you can play 48 minutes a night as center with Nick Richards and Mark Williams. Like, it seems to make so much sense. But I would not be surprised, and I would be moderately disappointed, because this does seem like an opportunity. And when you're a small market rebuild situation, you have but only so many opportunities to sort of, like, replenish and do things to help build the roster. And so, anyways, this is definitely an opportunity, but this is just a front office that doesn't seem to have a ton of motivation to seek stuff out. on the margins, or at least to maybe seek it out and then actually follow through with it. So, I wouldn't be shocked either way, and would only be probably a little disappointed if they sort of stray from what I think are would be best practices in terms of team build, and don't pull off a trade for shipping out at least one of these veterans.
Spencer,
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Spencer.
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say. I mean, you guys have laid it out well. I think I would just be like, I'd be moderately surprised if they don't trade one of Plumlee or Oubre. Just being expirings, I mean, those are two guys that I think you can plug into a winning roster and could give you playoff minutes. I wouldn't have said that about Plumlee entering the season, but like Brian said, I mean, might be having the best year of his career. I think that's probably not even a debate. Like he
I think he
probably is playing the best basketball ever that he's ever played. So, and also, I mean, he holds the record over Wilt Chamberlain now. So what can we not get for Mason Plumlee at this point? um, yeah, we're going to talk about a few players. I do think that PJ Washington probably has more value in the market than even homers like us would imagine. And I think that is interesting to monitor as we approach February the 9th. But, it sounds like Charlotte is interested in retaining him, which is interesting in itself, considering they could have just already done that. So a very Hornets thing of them to do. Just extended him before we got to this point. But yeah, they're going to be active, I think, but active could lead to no trades being done, right? Like both can kind of be true, and that's where I think having a 70-year-old GM who's has a history of not being active can come back to get you. So I have no doubt the phones are ringing off the hook, but Mitch could just get cold feet, as he's known to be
Or sleepy.
known to do. Yeah, or sleepy, or just needs to go to bed at 9 o'clock. So
Danny in the
Anyways.
Twitch chat says, I think Plumlee ends up in Boston. So, yeah, I think Plumlee, we keep mentioning him, and Oubre too. I think the expiring contract, like both works in their favor, but also like against them as well. Because if a team is trying to acquire one of these two, they do know that if it doesn't work out, it's only going to be for this half season. But by the same breath, if the Hornets are trying to get off one of these guys, they probably shouldn't expect too much coming back their way, because they do know it's somewhat of a rental here. So that's kind of the debate that not just the Hornets are having, but also opposing teams.
Plumlee to Boston is, I don't know if I quite see it, but it is a little interesting. He just becomes like Robert Williams insurance, I guess, he's a really important player for them. And obviously Plumlee's nowhere near the same talent or defensive player that Williams is. And they've got Horford, but and I guess the other thing would be if Boston traded for Plumlee, a team like Brooklyn that Boston could be in contention with for the Eastern Conference, that could also be in the market for Mason Plumlee. You maybe take away a possible trade, like a way for Brooklyn to possibly upgrade the roster too. So maybe there's a little added benefit. That's interesting. I don't know if I quite see that one, but I could see at least some of the logic behind it for the Celtics.
All right, guys, do we all agree that Plumlee, out of anyone on this roster, feels like the most tradable, or the one that has the most potential to be traded? Would anyone disagree with that?
Well, I think that Oubre and Plumlee are on the same.
1A, 1B.
I think they're in the same tier. Like Oubre, albeit we've talked about his defensive limitations, but he's a wing that can shoot. Is he streaky? Yes, but he can be a flamethrower in the right situation, and he's still a wing. Like he's more switchable than Plumlee is. So I think when you start having the conversation about playoffs and guys that you can actually have out there in serious situations, if Oubre's having a good game offensively, he can be in a good team's final five just because it's his night, right? Not because on paper he's always going to be in the final five, but I actually think those two guys are on the same tier. Obviously, with Oubre, the injury is a question mark, but I think the Hornets would be more than happy, along with Oubre's agent, to share all medical reports. I mean, it was reported to be a 4 to 6 week injury. Like, I'm not that concerned about that, other than maybe the conditioning of Oubre. But you're not trading for Oubre to come in and be, give you a spark day one. I think you're trading for him because you think he can be in your playoff rotation, right?
Mm-hmm. So Lee, let me go to you real quick. Rank the top 5 Hornets players that feel like they have the most potential to be traded.
So I would agree that Plumlee and Oubre are certainly the most likely. With the caveat that I've kind of maintained this entire time that, and I'm to be clear, I'm not saying that this is the front office's kind of like mandate or vision. I'm just saying from my perspective, if you truly want to guarantee a top 3 pick, trading Rozier is the path to that. I know that is far more complicated than trading Oubre or Plumlee, which is why they're more likely. I guess the point I'm just trying to make is that if this front office comes, out of their war room or whatever with the objective of securing a top 3 pick, trading Rozier is the path to that. So I put him as kind of third. And then I put PJ fourth. And then fifth, I had James Bouknight. So, yeah, I know. I mean, as like a sweetener in a deal or something, we'll talk about the group of guys that I got from a fake trade research standpoint later. I'm just like pretty convinced they're not going to trade McDaniels. That might be an incorrect opinion. He might get traded while we're on this podcast, but I really like McDaniels. He's like, I don't need to go through all the reasons why McDaniels is awesome. I'm just pretty convinced, potentially naively, that they won't trade him.
It's also harder to match his salary. Well, I mean, it's like 1 point something. I mean, it's just like at that point, you're just giving up on McDaniels and you're expecting not to have any kind of sway in the offseason. That would that would have to be the inclination. They're like, okay, we're just going to give up on McDaniels. Maybe we get a 2nd round pick.
With McDaniels, I think the rub is like it just has to be a 1st round pick in return. Because to your point, Richie, the salary is so hard. It's not hard to match. It's actually super. I mean, it's hard to match in terms of a player that's going to make sense, right?
Right.
To Charlotte, a contributor. So it's going to have to be a rookie contract or a minimum free agent. So then, to Lee's point, like I just don't see why Charlotte would trade him and not take it into unrestricted free agency if they're not getting a 1st round pick in return.
Yeah, so I agree with a lot with what you said, Lee, but I do have PJ Washington 3rd over Terry Rozier, only because of the years remaining on Rozier's contract. I know that I've kind of been harping on that, but I just think it's going to be so hard to trade him because of that. I think that just negates some of the value that he has on the court. I would not want to trade PJ Washington, especially if you feel like you have a chance to get him back in the offseason. But he still has a risk attached to him too. Like, if a team is trading for him, they do realize that it is a rental and it's not a long-term thing because he goes into the offseason as a restricted free agent. And I don't think the Hornets will trade Jalen either. And if they do trade Jalen, I keep saying this, they better do everything in their power to keep PJ, because I think those two are connected. If PJ is traded, you better hold on to Jalen. If Jalen is traded, you better hold on to Washington. So I think I have mine: Plumlee 1, Oubre 2, Washington 3, Rozier 4th on the roster as the most likely to be traded. And I just put McDaniels as 5. But again, it's not going to be both Washington and McDaniels. Bouknight, I just didn't put on there just because I don't think that there's interest out there. But to your point, Lee, it's going to be more of just like a throw-in.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much have the same order as you guys. Plumlee, I do have 1, 1A, 1B with Oubre, Rozier 3, PJ 4. And I mean, just tough because some of the hypotheticals to come up with PJ, there's some teams where he makes a lot of sense for, I think, and you can at least find salary to match but he becomes just so much of a 1-year rental. It's like some of these teams that I think he would make a lot of sense for and could really help now. It's just really, they're so attached to 3 or 4 other salaries, huge salaries going forward. It's just tough to see them squeezing PJ into the long-term future. And if that's the case, then, what are you getting in return? Does it make more sense? We've talked about this now, but, luckily if ultimately the goal, ultimately PJ isn't traded, you bring him back in free agency this summer. You can always move him again. I mean, maybe he even has more trade value down the line. 2 years into a second contract or something like that. So, or hell, maybe he's a piece long term here. Like, you wish Hayward could be mentioned here, but it just doesn't. It just feels kind of like
none of us have said him yet.
He was fit for me. But
okay.
But he's just that. It does seem like more and more that they're just gonna take it into next year with him. Like, the contract is, yeah. I mean, it's just 1 year left on it, so maybe that becomes the thing. But he's obviously a tough guy to trade for because just where his salary is, the amount of teams that would be willing to match salaries and trade for a player like Hayward, who is talented but expensive and often injured.
Just while we're here, because I don't really think we're going to talk much about Hayward on this podcast, I think the only possible way he's moved if it's like a Rozier Hayward package for Westbrook going to LA. Like, that's I've scanned the league. That's the only one I can see.
Yep.
And you can talk about picks or what's going here and there, but salary wise, that's it. Other than that,
that's the one I just assumed the door was mostly. I mean, maybe it's not. I just assumed the door. Maybe you feel the same way too. That's the one deal, and I feel like if that was going to happen, it had to happen maybe before the season. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, it kind of depends on what the Lakers are trying to do, I guess, because Russ's playmaking is kind of important for them too. So, but I guess if you get Rozier and Hayward, then maybe you're still viable without LeBron on the court all times.
Yeah, and it's a total bet for them on Hayward's health, and just if you come here, you got to play, man. Period. End of discussion. And so it's a huge bet, but I wouldn't say it's inconceivable either, because something tells me the Lakers still might be approaching the 1 yard line of a huge bet before February 9.
Hayward's playing well too right now too, so maybe that value's up. All right, so we're going to get into a segment where each of us have claimed a player or players, and we are going to present a fake trade that we came up with, and hopefully you guys ran it through the machine and it works out. And after that, we'll talk about, maybe who would say no in the deal, if we would potentially do it if we were Mitch Kupchak, and all that type of stuff. So Spencer, you were up first, and I believe you claimed Terry Rozier. Is that correct?
I did. And sorry, I couldn't help myself. I have two. So just bear with me, but I'll go fast. All right. So Terry Rozier, we talked about him a little bit at the beginning of the podcast. I think there's a lot of teams sniffing around. His utility is obvious. He's a great shooter. He's really coming on in the past month or so. But the contract holds you down, right? I mean, you got 3 more years. And as I was scanning teams, I found so many that need shooting that are in playoff contention, obviously most in the West, and basically anybody in the West outside of the top 2 can talk themselves into, why don't we just go for it this year? So I found a lot of teams that could use him, but his contract really is, to no one's surprise, an issue because of the timeline on it. Here's my first one. New Orleans needs shooting. I do think that like Memphis, and that's not my other team, but I do think like Memphis, they should really think hard about going for it now. So here's the trade I came up for with New Orleans, and it doesn't involve picks. Should it? Could it? Absolutely. You guys send me your rebuttals, your suggestions there, but this is a 3 for 3. The Hornets are getting Devontae Graham, welcome home,
Ooh.
Jackson Hayes on an expiring contract or end of his rookie contract, so they would have the rights there, and Kira Lewis, one of my back from old times, fell in love with this guy during the draft process. The Hornets will be sending to the Pelicans Terry Rozier, Nick Richards, and James Bouknight. So in a lot of ways, this is a true challenge trade, if you will. I mean, once you Kira versus Bouknight, Jackson versus Richards. Obviously, Jackson has a little bit more experience. And then Devontae is kind of like the Hornets are taking that salary in because he's got 2 more years after this one. So from that perspective, you could argue like, well, Charlotte should be getting a 2nd-round pick or a heavily protected 1st-round pick. That's fine. I just want to make the salaries work. They do. Let's see. The Hornets will be saving about $5 million on this trade, and the Pelicans will obviously be on the opposite end of that, taking on $5 million extra. The kicker with this trade is that it takes the Pelicans over the tax by about a little over $3 million. But they could dump Garrett Temple somewhere the same day and get under the tax. So this is the one where I thought it makes sense for both parties. I just don't think that Kira Lewis or Jackson Hayes are going to be a serious part of New Orleans' playoff rotation, nor Devontae Graham. So, and we're giving them a player that clearly will be a part of their playoff rotation, and Terry Rozier. And then, the Bouknight, Kira Lewis, and like I said, Richard Jackson Hayes is kind of the challenge part of it. Like, good luck. Yeah, let's bet on your player development. So this is the favorite one that I came up with. I think it makes sense for both sides. Again, I didn't put a pick in here, but I can hear everyone watching now saying, wait, where's the pick that Charlotte should be getting? And I agree, they should be getting something, but I was really just trying to make the salaries work here. So quickly, because I know we got a lot to get through. Any thoughts there?
No, it's funny. I was watching an NBA game the other night on NBA TV, and I feel like Kira Lewis was actually having a good game. I can't remember which game it was. I have not watched a lot of the Pelicans this season. I think you would obviously, with giving up Richards and maybe the uncertainty with Mason Plumlee, would you assume that Mason Plumlee would be coming back next year with this trade to solidify that center rotation? That'd be something that had to go through your mind. The Bouknight part, I just don't care about. So him going to New Orleans is fine. And obviously New Orleans is getting the best player in the deal with Rozier. And, bringing back Devontae Graham, that's nostalgia. I wouldn't mind that. And it feels like, from what you said, Spencer, he has one less year than Terry, which
Correct.
To me is
I
another
think it's
good
only
one.
one. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I just see I like Nick Richards a lot. I would love for him to stay in Charlotte and see Charlotte give him a contract, because I think it's going to be very fair value. But you got to give something up to get something, right? And I think that they'd get a pick back. So if you have to part ways with Richards and say this really athletic Jackson Hayes, big, who is, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he was a lottery pick, wasn't he? Let's get this guy in return, and he doesn't have value a lot on the market, I don't think. So you're going to be able to re-sign him on a decent deal, and you're moving forward with Mark Williams anyways. So bring these two guys into camp with a rebuilding roster again next year, and let them compete. That part makes sense to me.
I think Kira Lewis is I think he has a chance to be a real NBA player too. And I think the Pelicans, if they do hang on to Lewis, they probably need to still get Devontae out of there, because they got to find some way to creating more playing time for that guy at some point, which is kind of tough because now they're trying to get back into the top of the West. And, how do you manage all of that? It's kind of a lot of moving pieces, especially when your 2 tentpoles are, out right now. Or I guess Ingram just came back. But
and just Alvarado's just been so good. Kira hasn't been able to play.
His development, and then certainly they trade for McCollum midseason last year, and just it's changed the math in their backcourt quite a lot. And again, you've got 2 forwards that want to be on the ball a lot too, with Zion and BI. So it's tough to develop a third or fourth point guard, in that ecosystem, especially when the goal is to try to compete, maybe win a championship. As far as second drafting, a guy like Lewis would be here for it. I don't even know if I want to call it second drafting Hayes, because he was kind of a rotation player for the Pelicans last year in some of those weird double center lineups.
This year it's all changed.
Yeah, exactly. And to be able to get off of Rozier's long-term money is a win. In a way, I think that's maybe the way to think of it is it saves you a pick, Do you know what I mean? From having to
Yeah.
move a pick
Yep.
maybe at some point in the future to get off Rozier's salary. If that, I don't know, if that helps people sort of think about the trade or feel better about it, maybe that's one other thing to consider.
Yeah, and I think New Orleans can move Rozier again. But anyways, and I should say to kind of wrap this trade up, if I were running Charlotte right now and New Orleans was like, yeah, let's do this, I would do it without I would ask for the pick, obviously, and then they would say no. And I would say, let's do it. Let's do it. Because I do think you're getting a good chunk of equity in Kira Lewis, he's not even at the last year of his rookie contract, and Jackson Hayes, who you can re-sign to a very, very fair value on a cap sheet that's super clean. That I like, if just one of those guys were to hit 2 or 3 years from now, you probably won this trade. So I think I would do it without a pick.
Yeah, and you also might be able to move Hayes. At some if you
exactly.
resign
You
Hayes,
could flip
you might be
him
able
on
to
that contract.
flip it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
on that new contract. Totally. All right. So here's my second one. I've been vulturing this team for a long time, and there's a lot of different machinations of trades that you can do. It actually works a lot, and they have an owner that's willing to pay into the tax
I know who
for
this is.
forever and ever. Amen. The Clippers.
Yeah.
And I played through a lot of different ones. I really did. I was on this for like 45 minutes today. I was like, I got to get my life together. But the one I landed on was sending Plumlee and Rozier to the Clippers in a package for John Wall, Reggie Jackson, Amir Coffey, Jason Preston. So obviously Plumlee and Rozier. I think Plumlee could be super important for the Clippers, maybe more so than any other team in the league, in my opinion. Zubac is their guy, but he's got clear limitations, and I think Plumlee covered. He's just the perfect counterpart to what Zubac really can't bring to the table. Rozier, I just he's exactly. I mean, they're already a pretty good 3-point shooting team, but they don't have a lot of movement shooters, or really they don't have any movement shooters, to be honest. So I think that he is just tailor made for this roster and taking them from in the mix in the West to they would be one of my top 2 picks. And then what Charlotte's getting in return, I think John Wall, I think the Clippers would try to give you a hard time about that one, but I think when push came to shove, they would do it. He's got 1 year after this one, I think, left on his contract. Reggie Jackson's expiring. Amir Coffey's at a very small number for 2 more years. Jason Preston, similar to Kira Lewis, 1 more year after this on his rookie contract, and just kind of let's see if we can scratch something out of this guy. Always respect him. He beat Virginia in the NCAA tournament when he played for Ohio. So I don't like this one as much as I like the New Orleans one, but I do think it makes a lot of sense for both sides. No picks included. We just get those young, really one. I mean, Jacob Preston's really that's what you get from this deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, and you move off Rozier's salary too.
Correct.
So
yeah.
There's that benefit as well.
Yeah, that's the biggest benefit I see from this. I do like your first one a little bit better, Spencer. But again, in terms of the fairness, I can see how the Clippers would be enticed to do this. Yes.
I would like to see Ty Lue draw up floppy action with Luke Kennard and Terry Rozier too. I could see that. I could see Ty Lue being into that. And I think Plumlee is a guy that also would invite more movement if you inject him into it, because it's you throw it to him and you can, in second units and play off of him, at the elbow, play off him in the post, use him in the short roll. There's a lot of, he invites movement with his ability to be like a front court passing hub. Last
thing, and then I know we got to move on, but the amount of ways I tried to get Kennard to Charlotte is disgusting. I looked at so many different, but I knew the Clippers, Rozier for Kennard, it's just going to kind of boil down to that, and it just doesn't make sense for the Clippers. So
yeah, actually, Spencer, I think this was in 2021. You and I had a fake Clippers Hornets trade that was Kennard and Rozier. I think it was before the Rozier extension, actually.
We've been trying this for a while.
Pushing the button, not getting our treat in return, but we've been trying to do it.
Yeah, the only maybe you would try to get Boston instead of Preston, maybe, but that might be a deal breaker for the Clippers potentially. They that may go to no on them with that one.
I looked at that, Lee. The only reason I took him out is just because I think the Clippers would rather keep Boston versus Preston since
Agreed.
they're getting a guard, So, but yes, I mean, I would probably rather have Boston than Preston, honestly.
Yeah,
Same.
I think they're both worth taking a crack on. Like I think Preston is an intriguing young player that we've just seen very little of him against NBA competition, but I really liked him coming into the 2021 draft. And I actually thought Boston got devalued after his one tough season at Kentucky and is young and still worth long-term investment in terms of development. I guess, I see James is making comments here about Rozier being a team leader. I think it's something to consider. I think his closeness with LaMelo Ball is probably something that has to be considered as well. And that's tough, especially because ultimately, I don't think the Rozier LaMelo backcourt long term is the thing you absolutely want to hitch your wagon to. So at some point, you got to make a decision. And is it now, or do you kick the can down the road to the offseason or next trade deadline?
Yeah, and to comment on James' comment too about is Rozier's salary really that bad, especially in a year or two? The answer is no. It's really not that bad, James, but what comes into play is that you're trying to trade him to teams in the West mostly that are, once you trade him into that cap, they're bumping up against the tax. And there's only so many owners in the league that are going to bite hard and pay the tax. Like Denver, who I would say is probably the favorite to win the championship. Like they have an ownership group rather that is probably just not going to pay the tax unless they absolutely know they have a chance. So that was the difficulty going through Rozier trades, is that there's a lot of teams I know would love to have him and I'm sure have made calls, but they're not going to take their cap 10 million into the tax to make it happen, right? Where the trade rules would allow it to happen, but they're not going to do it because they can't get under the tax. The owner's just not going to pay it. So, rich people are cheap. That's the world we live in.
Yeah. It's especially interesting for someone like, Stan Kroenke that runs Denver. And again, he just access to just unlimited capital for someone like that to be cheap is just like, it's
literally
it's
have access to their own television deal, television network, the whole deal. But this is the NBA thing we've learned over and over again. These guys
he's got to spend it all on Arsenal. He's got to spend all his
Well, he owns the Rams too, and isn't he married into the Walton family? I think I'm correct on that. Anyways, I don't want to talk about billionaires anymore on this podcast. All right, next up, PJ Washington. I'll go through this quickly because I actually need to. I'm gonna have to probably dip out of here a little bit early. Apologies in advance, but went through some hypotheticals with PJ Washington. We've talked about hypothetical PJ trades for a while now. I know we did. Spencer, you and I did a pod back in December where we talked at length about PJ trades, and there was one pod I did with, I think, Lee and Richie the week before or week after, where we kicked the can on the PJ to Golden State trade packages even before those kind of started making, I think, slightly more national waves. So I won't go through PJ to Golden State hypotheticals because we've actually talked about that a decent amount already on the pod. And it does seem like, Zach Lowe reported this, and this was getting aggregated in a lot of other places. It does seem like, or he didn't report this, he mentioned on his podcast, but it was getting aggregated as if it were sort of newsworthy in a lot of other locations, which was, the Hornets are, leaning towards keeping PJ and keeping him in the fold and going into restricted free agency and bringing him back this offseason. I think that still makes a lot of sense, and in part because you can always flip PJ again down the road if you need to. And so maybe it is the best bet to bring him back. He's having a tough, but I think pretty good season in a lot of ways, certainly on the defensive end of the court. There were also a lot of teams that I thought it was worthwhile to come up with fake PJ trades for. I kicked the can again on those Golden State ones. I looked at Cleveland with PJ. I don't know how much of a need there is for him there, especially with Kevin Love coming back into the rotation. But thought that was kind of interesting. I thought maybe even a team like Portland could be interested. I thought maybe there might be something with Sac, like if Sacramento was trying to upgrade the Trey Lyles and KZ Okpala minutes, but again, it was tough to sort of find a great deal for him unless you thought Davion Mitchell plus Alex Len for PJ. I don't see Sac wanting to move off of Davion Mitchell. He's kind of he's in the rotation for them, and they're a good Western Conference playoff team right now. So where I did end up landing was the aforementioned Denver Nuggets, actually. And what we know with Denver is that this team has one of the best starting lineups in the NBA. Murray, KCP, Porter Jr., Gordon, and Jokic. In those lineups, when you sub in Bruce Brown for one of those guys, are really, really good too. Denver's out a lot of first-round picks. They're out a 2025 first to Orlando, 2027 to OKC, and of course, Charlotte has rights on their 2023 first-round pick. So they're a little encumbered in terms of like what they can offer if you're hunting for picks. And obviously, they've got a cheap owner, as Spencer was just saying, and they've got a lot of money tied up in Murray, Jokic, Porter Jr., and actually, I want to say Gordon probably too, at least to an extent. So this really would be, at most a rental. And I'm not even sure if it's something that I don't know how it would impact their tax line here either. But PJ would give the Nuggets a legit stretch four next to Jokic. He can cut, he can play without the ball. He's got that little floater push shot. Gordon has been awesome, but he doesn't really stretch the court. So PJ's a guy that you could even play at some backup center minutes. Like, it does feel like Denver's been kind of just like scrapping that stuff together to an extent. So I was kind of thinking maybe I'm shooting low here for a player like PJ that I think is really, a nice young player. But I was kind of thinking like second draft options. So Zeke Naji, PJ Washington, that works financially. Naji is like kind of in the rotation, or at least has been some for this season, but it's a prospect I liked in the 2020 draft. Peyton Watson's a guy that struggled a lot at UCLA last season. He was played very, very little this year, but I liked him in the pre-college scouting process. I liked watching him play for the Team USA World Cup team in 2021 on that roster. So maybe I'm aiming short, but PJ Washington to Denver as the Nuggets really try to like load up and grab one more piece to perhaps solidify title contention status, and the Hornets get two I guess interesting young prospects in return. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in terms of selling a little bit low on PJ, but I think the market is going to be difficult with the fact that he is a rental, as you say, Brian. I did not scout Naji out of Arizona that much, so I'm not really sure what he brings to the NBA level. Like what Lee, what's his like one skill that he had out of Arizona coming into the league that might translate?
He can stretch the floor. He's kind of he's like a 7-footer, but he's like kind of a finesse 7-footer. Some rim protection flashes, stuff like that. He was my favorite of the 3 Arizona prospects that year. Josh Green and who's the point guard, Brian?
Nico Mannion. He's not even in the NBA. He's abroad now. He's in Europe.
He's out of the league, right?
Yeah.
And Josh Green probably has had the most success so far, to be fair.
Yeah, he's had a nice. I mean, he's really turned into a player for Dallas.
He's helping Dallas.
Yeah.
I think Richie had put it in the chat. I mean, could you push for Bones for PJ?
Even better. I mean, if it was Bones and Watson. Yeah, I mean that would probably make a little bit more sense in terms of like what you're getting in return. I don't know how you guys feel about Highland. It'd be a bet on the creation upside for him, which I think is kind of an interesting move. for Charlotte to maybe to take a bet on as they're kind of rebuilding here. Like I like Highland, but he obviously is bad defensively and offensively. You know, it's a bet on you know, kind of like an electric yet erratic offensive young guard. So there's, you know, it can go a lot of different ways when you put all your you know, if you kind of go in that direction with
there's a lot of Monk and Bones, which is interesting.
There's a lot of watching Traquavion Smith at NC State. I think there's a fair amount.
That's a good one. Yeah,
that's a obvious comparison there as well. I think.
I like this trade, BG. I really do. I like Zeke Naji a lot. I mean, I've seen a fair amount of the Nuggets this year just because they're so freaking fun to watch. You know, defensive concerns, of course. You know, he's thin as a rail. Is that exactly what the Hornets need? I don't know. But I think you're getting good value if you could put him in this trade. But even if it's Peyton and Zeke, I still think that's pretty dang fair. I think if the Hornets were in the mindset that, like, look, we didn't extend PJ Washington because we didn't want to, like, we meant this. Let's see what we can get for him. If you can get 2 rookie contracts that can be in your rotation, like, heck yeah, let's go. But now it seems like they've pivoted there. The one thing I would say about Zeke is that, you know, now you got Mark Williams, Zeke, and Nick Richards. So would you make this deal a little earlier and then shop Richards elsewhere because now you got a traffic jam there? But, you know, hey, good. Having 3 good centers compete with each other also, and just carrying them into the season and trading one later also isn't the worst thing in the world.
In 4 good centers when you draft Victor Wembanyama with the number 1 pick this coming summer. All right, guys, I apologize. I got to bounce, but look forward to it. It was fun chatting. And look forward to listening.
I'll text you my book night trades, BG.
All right, I want to know, honestly. All right,
book night for Spencer Percy, straight up, no picks involved.
Oh my God. Yeah, I think it's funny that we're at the point of the season where I think multiple people on this podcast have had book night rants. And I will say, I saw a game of him in Greensboro, the G League recently, or a few weeks back, where it didn't look, guys, it didn't look pretty on either end of the court. So there's wherever the panic button is, they should be mashing it right about now, I think. All right, I'll talk to y'all later.
Right. See you, Brian. All right, we're going to go ahead and finish up this conversation here, and I'm kind of up against the clock as well. So I know that Lee and I have yet to present our fake trades, and I was assigned Plumlee, or actually I chose Plumlee. I chose Plumlee to come up with a fake trade. And as I was talking about this before the podcast in terms of how hard it was for me to do this, because knowing that there is some, I wouldn't say risk in going for Plumlee, but as an opposing team, you would want Plumlee if you're trying to get over the hump. Whether that means you're going from, you know, the 6th seed to try to get into the top half of your conference, or maybe you're just trying to solidify your spot in the playoffs. I don't think a team, you know, that is rebuilding would take on Plumlee. So we've also had conversations too, like, you know, Plumlee is at his peak in terms of his value right now. And yes, would he garner a 1st-round pick? No. But I started thinking, can I attach a 2nd-round pick to Plumlee to get a 1st-round pick? So trying to add those values together to maybe get a 1st-round pick, even if it means that we have to be patient for a year or 2. So I have 2 quick trades like you, Spencer, and I'm just going to present both of them at the same time. They're fairly small in terms of what's included here. It's just player for player and pick for pick. So first one is with OKC. Now, OKC is a team that probably is just going to stand pat. They are kind of in that play-in range, and they're playing really well over their expectations. But, you know, I think Plumlee fits perfectly with the offense that they do have. And so there's a player in OKC that's completely out of the rotation, and it wouldn't necessarily be a player that the Hornets would like trade to try to groom and hopefully he'd be part of the future. It's just more of, hey, what can Plumlee add for OKC this season, and see if they can get a little bit farther up in the playoff race. So my trade with OKC is Plumlee and then our 2023 second round pick, like this upcoming draft from Utah, goes to OKC. And in exchange, we get Baisley and we get a future first round pick in 2025. So you're getting off Plumlee if you didn't expect him to come back next season. And again, the first round pick is only coming our way because we're attaching a second. And then the second trade is with Dallas. Dallas, the center rotation has been a little bit iffy over there. They've had injuries, and I don't think they would go for it because the player that I'm including here is starting to get hot for Dallas, and it's the same concept: Plumlee plus the second round pick. So it'd be Plumlee and a second round pick, the 2023 second round pick. We would be getting Reggie Bullock, who has this season, I think next season, which is partially guaranteed, and we'd be getting their first round pick. I actually think Dallas might be less likely to do this because they have a lot of first round picks tied up. So I don't even know if they could even do it next season because of the Stepien rule. So it might have to be like in 2024 or like 2026 or something to that nature. But Dallas needs shot makers, and Plumlee doesn't do that, but he can definitely ignite the offense. So what are you guys' thoughts in terms of that? Like, obviously Plumlee by himself can't get a first round pick, but maybe attaching a second round pick to get a future.
Can you say the first one more time? Sorry.
First one. The first one is Plumlee plus our 2023 second round pick from Utah for Baisley. And I could care less about Baisley, but it's just like a future first round pick.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely like the OKC one better. I don't think Dallas would do that. Yeah. I mean, the OKC one, like, I would even let them like top 25 protect it. Right. And then let it convert into 2 seconds. Like, I would even do it then. Because I don't think Baisley is like, Baisley's like a 4.5. Would you say, Lee? He's kind of a weird. I don't really know.
And I think with like as many good young players as OKC has and as many draft picks they have, like I think they're going to probably have to cut Baisley next year anyway.
Yeah, true. And he's so redundant to like Ousmane Dieng,
Yep.
So, yeah. I mean, in Baisley, like Charlotte's the perfect place for him next year.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Yeah, to see if he belongs in the NBA. And I think if you're getting I don't know if I'd let him top 25 protect it, and maybe I'd let him top 20 protect it to just see if I could sneak into the first round with this pick and then take it out. I mean, in 2020, what'd you say, 2025, Richie?
Something like that.
Would be the OKC. I mean, they're going to be pretty dang good. So maybe we could split the difference and top 23 protect it, right? Like, I think OKC is going to be pretty good in 2025. So if I can get the 25th, 26th pick, like, all right, that's awesome for Mason Plumlee, in my opinion. But if it converts to 2 seconds, I'd do it anyways too. Like, I'm not going to haggle too much here. So I really, really like that one.
That's actually a great trade. I think the only, and you might have even mentioned, like the only caveat I think is Oklahoma City might just not want to do anything. But like in terms of like kind of making sense for both teams and squeezing like as much realistic value out of Plumlee, I think that's a pretty sweet spot, actually, that trade.
The other thing with OKC, because I was looking at them earlier, Richie, so I'd have to look at this. I mean, you probably already did, but they have $28 million in dead cap from Kemba Walker's contract sitting on their books.
I thought you were going to say 28 million draft picks.
Yeah, well, they also have 28 million draft picks. I think they have 29 million draft picks, actually. But, yeah, they've got all this dead cap from the Kemba contract sitting on their books, which I completely forgot about because I was trying to do these trades with them. And I was like, wait a minute, how are they in the tax after this? But they have a ton of dead cap from that Kemba deal. And that's certainly not a team that's going to go a cent into the tax. So I'm not sure. Yeah. Plumlee probably wouldn't take them quite there this season, but any kind of trade where he's going to OKC and Charlotte's taking anything back, they'd have to take equal amount of money back to make sure that they don't go into the tax.
That's true. And I think in my situation, that was not the case. I think Baisley is worth less. So it may not work out in our favor, but my whole idea was like attaching a second to get a future first. And even if that means being patient and not getting that instant gratification. So Lee,
Totally. And you can build off of that. You could find salary, even if you had to bring in a third team, just be like, here, just like we got to fit salary here. Like that you're on to something big time there. It's close enough to the goal line to where I think you could still make it happen. Yeah.
All right, Lee, go ahead with your fake trade.
All right, I'll go quick here. So my pick was I took the young guys, which is pretty much Bouknight and Kai Jones. I mean, maybe you could throw in JT Thor for a potential young guy on the block, but with these young guys that haven't really proven themselves, particularly James Bouknight, who is kind of a toxic asset probably at this point, you basically have to go with challenge trades to use Spencer's term. So I've got a few names here of either similarly like haven't played much or have maybe underachieved. So the first name has already been stolen, Kira Lewis Jr., like first guy I thought of for like Spencer, loved him in the 2020 draft cycle. He's been stuck behind good players on a good team. So you'd probably have to do Bouknight and Kai for Kyra Lewis. I think the problem with that is, like, what does that do for New Orleans, if anything? You know what I mean? Like, they're trying to win now. I don't know if they're particularly interested in like a young prospect swap. The other name that I came up with was Isaac Okoro.
Oh, yeah.
Just kind of completely has fallen flat in Cleveland, mostly because they need him and he just can't quite give them what they need. Like Cleveland needs one more physical, athletic wing that can make shots, and he is a just horrific shooter at this point in his career. So a place where he would have a bit less pressure on him from kind of a performance standpoint. I just don't know if Cleveland is going to be really ready to like give up on him yet. And is the prospect of what a redraft Bouknight or future Kai Jones, development, is that enough to swing them? Not sure, but it's a name I like for Charlotte. And then the only other one I had was Johnny Davis in Washington. Another lottery pick that's disappointed that you could maybe challenge trade Bouknight and Thor for or something like that. So that's all I got.
Yeah, I mean these trades are. I mean, it's a little boring because it is a challenge trade. But I would agree. I think Isaac Okoro probably intrigues me the most of the names that you mentioned. I mean, well, Kyra Lewis too, but to your point, Kyra Lewis for Bouknight and Kai Jones, I don't think it does enough for New Orleans in that situation. I've always been interested in Isaac Okoro because of the things that he can bring on the defensive side of the court. I don't want to get in a situation again. We have another MKG where there's not much offense either. So, what do you think, Spencer, as we wrap up here? I know Lee's got to get out as well, but of those young players that he mentioned, Kyra Lewis, Isaac Okoro, and I think Johnny Davis, either of those, intrigue you?
Yeah, I mean, I like the Okoro theoretical. I think that we'd probably have to certainly give something up there. Just because James Bouknight has like zero value left. Not that he ever really started with any value in the league. Kira Lewis, yeah. I mean, you know how I feel about that one. With my fake trade. And then who was the other one again? Help me.
Johnny Davis.
Yeah, I mean, total mystery. Like really, really good player at Wisconsin. Didn't love him in the draft process. I don't really think any of us did, but worth a swing. Like Johnny, in terms of like fair value for both sides, challenge trade. This is the ultimate challenge trade. Drafted in the same class. James Bouknight versus Johnny Davis. I think that's actually no wait. Is Johnny Davis a year younger? He might be. Anyways, I think that one makes a lot of sense because he has been a complete no-show in Washington. So that one would make some sense too. Boy, the James Bouknight situation's, God, so depressing.
Yeah, I don't even consider him when it comes to these trade talks, because we had the conversation on the that one podcast. Will Mitch stay idle about him just being a throw in and a sweetener? It's just, there's not going to be a trade centered around Bouknight. If he is traded, it's just going to be because they just have to attach something. So it could be likely that Mitch might stay idle, and we talked about that on the top half of the podcast. And we wanted to thank everyone for joining us today on YouTube and Twitch and on Twitter Spaces. We're up against an hour here, so we're going to go ahead and get out of here. We appreciate the support, guys. For Spencer, who is still with me here on video, but also for Lee and for Brian,